Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the final curtain call of the Virgin Queen herself, Elizabeth I's absolutely bonkers coffin extravaganza, the oak and brass masterpiece that turned royal death into the most expensive theatre production in English history, and gave us elaborate funeral processions, diplomatic coffin tourism, and the subtle art of making eternity look fabulous while politically terrifying your enemies. So before we get started, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy learning about dead monarchs who somehow managed to be more dramatic in death than most people are in life. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what century you think had the best royal funeral game. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world to discuss the fine art of prestigious corpse storage. Now, grab your favorite beverage, maybe light a candle for that authentic Tudor atmosphere, and let's ease into tonight's journey through the most over-engineered coffin in British history. So, you think modern funerals are expensive? Sweet summer child. Precious really, like someone thinking a Honda Civic could compete in Formula One. Elizabeth's final send-off made contemporary celebrity funerals look like budget backyard barbecues, complete with enough brass fittings to blind half of London, and more political symbolism than you could shake a scepter at. This wasn't just burial, this was the Tudor equivalent of dropping the mic, except the mic was made of oak, weighed more than a small horse, and took 8 strong men just to carry it while the entire kingdom watched and wept. Tonight, we're exploring how the last Tudor turned dying into the ultimate power move, creating a coffin so magnificent that it's still making historians weak in the knees 4 centuries later. Before you could even dream of witnessing the most elaborate funeral procession in British history, you had to understand that Queen Elizabeth didn't just die. She staged her final performance, England's version of a theatrical masterpiece, except the only audience that mattered was eternity itself, and the reviews would echo through centuries. Step 1. Acknowledge the Queen is mortal. Shocking concept for a woman who'd convinced half of Europe she was practically divine. The courtiers. They'd seen 1,000 rumours of her death, and weren't buying it this time either. But there she was, 70 years old, refusing food, refusing medicine, refusing to admit that even virgin queens eventually succumb to the basic inconvenience of biology. The death watch began in March 1603, though nobody dared call it that. You don't tell the woman who defeated the Spanish Armada that she's dying. You politely suggest she might consider resting. Forever. Elizabeth knew the game better than anyone. She'd been performing for 45 years, and her final act would be her most memorable. No tears, no dramatics. Just the slow, deliberate exit of a woman who turned monarchy into high art and wasn't about to botch the finale. When she finally died on March 24th, the machinery of royal death cranked into motion with the efficiency of a Swiss clockmaker and the pageantry of a Broadway production. This wasn't just a funeral. It was a statement, a masterclass in royal branding, and a very expensive way of saying, try to top this, successor. The first challenge was the body itself. Elizabeth had been vain about her appearance in life, plastering her face with white lead makeup that probably contributed to her death. Now she was dead, and vanity wasn't going to help. The embalmers, skilled in the delicate art of making corpses presentable for public viewing, had their work cut out for them. The process of embalming a queen wasn't your standard mortuary procedure. This was preservation with political implications. The body had to last long enough for the entire kingdom to pay respects, which in 1603 meant potentially weeks of lying in state. No refrigeration, no modern chemicals, just traditional methods that relied heavily on spices, oils, and prayer. The embalmers worked like surgeons preparing for the most important operation of their careers, because in a very real sense they were. Get it wrong, and you're not just dealing with decomposition, you're dealing with the collapse of royal mystique. Elizabeth's body was wrapped in cerecloth, a wax-soaked linen that would help preserve the remains and create a barrier between the royal flesh and the outside world. Even in death, the Queen maintained her distance from her subjects. The wrapping wasn't random, it was methodical, ritualistic. Each layer applied with the reverence reserved for religious artifacts. Because that's essentially what Elizabeth had become, a sacred object. A relic of the Tudor dynasty that needed to be preserved not just for burial, but for history itself. The coffin was where the real artistry began. This wasn't some standard wooden box you'd find at your local carpenter's shop. This was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, a final throne designed to carry Elizabeth from mortality to legend. Made of oak, the most durable wood available, it was built to last not just for the funeral procession, but potentially for centuries. The Tudor rose was carved into every surface, a reminder that even in death, Elizabeth remained the embodiment of her dynasty. The interior was lined with purple velvet, the colour of royalty, because apparently even corpses need to maintain their social status. The padding wasn't just for comfort, it was for preservation. Every surface that might come into contact with the royal remains was cushioned and treated, creating a microenvironment designed to protect the body during transport and interment. This wasn't sentiment, this was practical politics. The Queen's body would be on display, and it needed to look appropriately royal throughout the entire process. But the exterior was where the coffin makers really showed off. The wood was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the candlelight that would surround it during the lying in state period. Brass fittings adorned every corner, not cheap decorative elements, but genuine craftsmanship that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The handles alone were works of art, designed to bear not just the physical weight of the coffin, but the symbolic weight of a dynasty ending. The lid bore Elizabeth's coat of arms, carved in relief and painted in the royal colours. This wasn't just identification, it was advertising. Even from across Westminster Abbey, observers would know exactly whose funeral they were attending. The heraldry was precise, every detail verified by the College of Arms, because getting the royal insignia wrong on the Queen's coffin would be the kind of mistake that ended careers and possibly lives. Around the edges of the coffin, brass studs formed geometric patterns that caught and reflected light from every angle. This wasn't accidental, it was calculated visual drama. The coffin needed to be visible from the back of any crowd, needed to command attention, even when surrounded by the elaborate pageantry of royal mourning. In a world without electric lighting, every reflective surface was a strategic choice. The construction process was a masterclass in medieval engineering disguised as carpentry. The joints were dovetailed with mathematical precision, creating a seal that would protect the contents from moisture, air, and anything else that might compromise the royal remains. The wood was seasoned for years before construction began, ensuring it wouldn't warp or crack under the stress of supporting Elizabeth's body and the weight of royal expectations. Inside the coffin, every detail was considered. The pillow beneath Elizabeth's head was stuffed with herbs chosen not just for their preservative qualities, but for their symbolic meaning. Rosemary for remembrance, lavender for devotion, mint for virtue. Even the stuffing had political implications in Tudor England. The sheets were silk, imported at enormous expense, because apparently Egyptian cotton wasn't good enough for the Virgin Queen. The construction team worked in secret, behind closed doors, because the mere existence of a royal coffin was a state secret until the moment of death. Building a coffin for a living monarch was technically treason, implying you were plotting their demise. So the craftsmen worked without knowing exactly who their masterpiece was intended for, creating a work of art that could theoretically house any member of the royal family. Only when Elizabeth actually died did the coffin's true purpose become official. The weight of the finished product was staggering. Oak is heavy under the best of circumstances, but when you add brass fittings, velvet lining, and the accumulated weight of royal symbolism, you're looking at a coffin that required 8 strong men just to carry it. This wasn't a bug, it was a feature. The difficulty of moving Elizabeth's coffin was part of the theatre, a physical representation of the burden of monarchy and the weight of her legacy. The lid mechanism was engineered with the precision of a clockwork. It had to seal completely to preserve the royal remains, but it also had to be opened for the lying in state period, allowing subjects to view their dead queen one final time. The hinges were custom, forged, designed to support the weight of the oak lid without sagging or binding. Every moving part was tested repeatedly, because mechanical failure during a royal funeral wasn't just embarrassing, it was a potential crisis of confidence in the monarchy itself. When the coffin was finally ready, it was transported to Greenwich Palace in absolute secrecy. wrapped in black cloth and accompanied by guards who'd sworn oaths of silence. Even the movement of a royal coffin was a state ceremony, requiring coordination between multiple government departments and enough security to repel a small army. The coffin couldn't just be loaded onto a wagon and driven through London. It needed to travel with dignity, respect, and enough armed protection to prevent any unfortunate incidents involving overeager mourners or political opportunists. The placement of Elizabeth's body in the coffin was a ceremony in itself, attended by the highest-ranking nobles in the realm. This wasn't just logistics. It was the final act of Elizabeth's transformation from living monarch to historical artifact. The body was arranged with the same attention to detail that had characterized her public appearances in life. Her hands were positioned holding a scepter and orb, symbols of royal authority that would accompany her to the grave. Her face was covered with a cloth mask, preserving her dignity and hiding the ravages of embalming from public view. Even in death, Elizabeth maintained her mystique. The mask wasn't just practical, it was psychological, allowing mourners to remember their queen as she had been in life rather than confronting the reality of decay and death. The royal image was carefully controlled even in the coffin. The lying in state period began immediately after the coffin was sealed and transported to Westminster Palace. This wasn't just a chance for subjects to pay their respects. It was a massive public relations exercise designed to demonstrate the continuity of monarchy and the smooth transition of power to James I. Every detail was choreographed, from the placement of candles around the coffin to the rotation of guards maintaining the death watch. The coffin sat on a raised platform draped in purple velvet, surrounded by hundreds of candles that burned continuously throughout the lying in state period. The light wasn't just ceremonial, it was practical, ensuring that mourners could see the coffin clearly and appreciate the craftsmanship that had gone into its creation. The candles were replaced constantly by a staff of attendants who worked in shifts, maintaining the visual spectacle around the clock. Guards stood at each corner of the coffin, motionless sentinels who changed positions with military precision every few hours. These weren't just any soldiers, they were hand-picked members of the Royal Guard, chosen as much for their ability to stand perfectly still for extended periods as for their loyalty to the crown. Fainting or fidgeting during the death watch wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially treasonous, suggesting a lack of proper respect for the deceased monarch. The public viewing was carefully controlled, with mourners filing past the coffin in organized lines that prevented crowding and maintained the dignity of the occasion. Palace officials monitored the crowd constantly, watching for signs of excessive emotion or inappropriate behavior. Wailing was discouraged, fainting was embarrassing, and any attempt to touch the coffin was grounds for immediate removal and possible imprisonment. Nobles were given priority access, allowed to approach the coffin more closely and linger longer than common subjects. This wasn't just social hierarchy, it was political theatre, demonstrating the loyalty of the aristocracy and their acceptance of the new king. Every major family in England was expected to send representatives to view Elizabeth's body, and failure to appear was noted and remembered by government officials keeping track of political reliability. The coffin itself became a focal point for grief, loyalty, and political calculation. Mourners approached it with a mixture of genuine sorrow and careful awareness that their behavior was being observed and judged. Crying was acceptable, sobbing was excessive. Kneeling was appropriate, prostration was theatrical. Even grief had its proper protocols in Tudor England, and Elizabeth's coffin was the stage where these protocols were most strictly enforced. Foreign ambassadors were given special viewing privileges, allowed to examine the coffin and its decorations as a demonstration of English craftsmanship and royal wealth. The coffin wasn't just Elizabeth's final resting place. It was a piece of international propaganda, designed to impress foreign dignitaries and reinforce England's position as a major European power. Every brass fitting and carved detail was a statement about English artistic achievement and royal resources. The heraldic decorations on the coffin lid became subjects of intense scrutiny among the diplomatic community. Foreign observers studied every symbol, looking for clues about succession plans and future policy directions. The Tudor rose was obvious. but the positioning of other heraldic elements provided subtle hints about the new king's intentions and the continuity of various political alliances. Even Elizabeth's coffin was a diplomatic document, encoded with messages for those who knew how to read royal symbolism. After 2 weeks of lying in state, the coffin was prepared for the funeral procession to Westminster Abbey. This wasn't just transportation, it was the largest parade in English history, designed to demonstrate the power and stability of the monarchy while providing a spectacular farewell to the last Tudor monarch. The coffin would be the centerpiece of a procession that included thousands of participants and spectators lining every street between Westminster Palace and the Abbey. The funeral carriage was built specifically for Elizabeth's coffin, a wheeled platform draped in black velvet and pulled by horses whose harnesses had been dyed black for the occasion. The carriage wasn't just functional, it was theatrical, designed to elevate the coffin above the crowd and make it visible from blocks away. Even the wheels were wrapped in black cloth to muffle the sound and create an appropriately solemn atmosphere. The placement of the coffin on the carriage required careful engineering. The oak coffin was heavy enough that improper weight distribution could cause the carriage to tip or the axles to break during the procession. Palace engineers spent weeks calculating load factors and testing the carriage with weighted substitutes, because mechanical failure during Elizabeth's funeral procession would be a disaster of unprecedented proportions. Ropes secured the coffin to the carriage platform, but these weren't ordinary ropes. They were silk cords dyed black and decorated with tassels, because even the practical elements of royal funerals needed to maintain appropriate aesthetic standards. The ropes were tested for strength repeatedly, and backup systems were installed in case the primary restraints failed. Elizabeth's coffin wasn't going to slide off its carriage and crash into the London streets, not if human planning could prevent it. The procession route was cleared and cleaned days in advance, with every cobblestone inspected for loose stones that might cause the funeral carriage to jostle excessively. The coffin needed to travel smoothly, both for practical reasons of preservation and for symbolic reasons of dignity. A bumpy ride to Westminster Abbey would undermine the solemnity of the occasion and suggest that England couldn't even provide its dead queen with comfortable transportation. Spectators lined the route 10 deep, held back by barriers and guards who maintained clear lanes for the funeral procession. This wasn't just crowd control, it was psychological management, ensuring that the public viewing of Elizabeth's coffin remained orderly and respectful. The coffin needed to be visible to as many mourners as possible while maintaining the security and dignity appropriate to a royal funeral. The funeral procession included over 1,000 participants, from high-ranking nobles to common soldiers, all dressed in elaborate mourning attire and arranged in order of precedence that reflected the complex hierarchy of Tudor society. The coffin was the centerpiece of this massive parade, but it was surrounded by a supporting cast that included everyone from foreign ambassadors to royal musicians, all participating in England's final farewell to Elizabeth. Musicians played funeral dirges throughout the procession, but their instruments were muted and their tempo kept deliberately slow to match the pace of the funeral carriage. This wasn't entertainment, it was ceremonial accompaniment, designed to enhance the solemnity of the occasion without overwhelming the central focus on Elizabeth's coffin. Even the music was carefully calibrated to support, rather than compete with the visual drama of the royal funeral. The coffin's brass fittings caught and reflected sunlight throughout the procession, creating flashes of light that were visible from considerable distances. This wasn't accidental. The reflective elements had been positioned specifically to catch natural light and create visual interest even from the back of the crowd. Elizabeth's coffin was designed to be a beacon, drawing attention and commanding respect from every possible viewing angle. At Westminster Abbey, the coffin was carried from the funeral carriage to the altar by 8 pallbearers chosen from the highest-ranking nobles in the realm. This wasn't just manual labor, it was a final honor, allowing the most prominent members of English society to literally bear the weight of their dead queen's body. The selection of pallbearers was itself a political statement, identifying which families remained in royal favor and would likely maintain their influence under the new king. The abbey had been prepared for weeks, with additional seating constructed to accommodate the thousands of mourners expected to attend Elizabeth's funeral service. The coffin was placed on a raised platform directly in front of the altar, surrounded by candles and floral arrangements that had been designed to complement the coffin's oak finish and brass decorations. Even the flower selection was politically significant, with blooms chosen to represent various aspects of Elizabeth's reign and personality. During the funeral service, the coffin remained the focal point of attention, positioned so that it was visible to every attendee, while maintaining appropriate distance from the general congregation. This wasn't just respect for the dead, it was practical crowd management, ensuring that the coffin remained secure and undisturbed throughout the lengthy funeral ceremony. Elizabeth's final performance required proper staging, and her coffin was the central prop in this ultimate theatrical production. The Archbishop of Canterbury delivered the funeral oration while standing directly beside Elizabeth's coffin, his hand occasionally resting on the polished oak surface as he spoke about the Queen's achievements and legacy. This physical contact wasn't scripted, but it was symbolically powerful, connecting the religious authority of the Church with the political authority represented by the coffin and its contents. Even in death, Elizabeth remained a bridge between temporal and spiritual power. After the service, the coffin was carried to the royal vault beneath Westminster Abbey, where it would be interred alongside previous monarchs in a ceremony witnessed by only the most senior government officials and religious leaders. This wasn't public theatre, it was private ritual, the moment when Elizabeth ceased to be a queen and became a historical artifact. The coffin's journey from public display to private burial marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of Elizabeth's transformation from ruler to legend. The royal vault was a chamber carved from stone and lined with marble, designed to house the mortal remains of English monarchs for eternity. Elizabeth's coffin was placed on a stone platform that had been prepared specifically for her interment, positioned so that future visitors to the vault would immediately recognize the resting place of the Virgin Queen. Even underground, the coffin's brass fittings reflected the limited light available in the burial chamber, maintaining their visual impact in the tomb's shadowy environment. The sealing of the royal vault was conducted with the same ceremony that had characterized every other aspect of Elizabeth's funeral arrangements. Stonemasons worked under the supervision of government officials, ensuring that the vault was properly sealed and marked with appropriate identifying inscriptions. The coffin itself was never again to be moved or disturbed, but its location was carefully documented and recorded in official registers maintained by Westminster Abbey. But Elizabeth's coffin story didn't end with burial. Within years of her interment, the royal vault became a destination for important visitors to England. Foreign dignitaries who requested permission to view the tomb of the famous Virgin Queen. The coffin, though no longer visible, remained a symbol of English achievement and royal authority. Visitors would stand in the burial chamber and contemplate the oak and brass masterpiece that contained the remains of one of England's most successful monarchs. The craftsmanship that had gone into Elizabeth's coffin became a standard for royal funerals throughout the following centuries. Future monarchs and their funeral planners looked to Elizabeth's arrangements as a model of appropriate royal burial, copying elements of design and ceremony that had proven successful in managing the public spectacle of royal death. The coffin's influence extended far beyond Elizabeth's own funeral, shaping royal burial practices for generations. During the English Civil War, when royal tombs were targeted by Republican forces intent on destroying symbols of monarchical authority, Elizabeth's burial vault was broken open and her coffin examined by parliamentary investigators. They found the oak construction still sound after decades underground, the brass fittings untarnished, and the royal remains still preserved within their elaborate wrappings. The coffin's durability became part of Elizabeth's legend, suggesting that even death couldn't diminish the Virgin Queen's supernatural qualities. The investigators documented their findings in reports that provided detailed descriptions of the coffin's construction and contents, creating an official record of Elizabeth's burial arrangements that became part of the government archives. These documents later proved invaluable to historians studying royal funeral practices and the symbolic significance of monarchical death rituals. Even parliamentary enemies of the monarchy couldn't help but admire the craftsmanship that had gone into Elizabeth's final resting place. When the monarchy was restored under Charles II, one of his first official acts was to reseal Elizabeth's tomb and restore the dignity of her burial site. The coffin was examined again, this time by royal officials seeking to repair any damage inflicted during the parliamentary investigation. They found the oak and brass construction largely intact, requiring only minor restoration work to return the coffin to its original condition. Elizabeth's final resting place was once again secure, protected by royal authority and religious sanction. The restoration work included new brass fittings to replace elements that had been damaged or removed during the parliamentary period, but the craftsmen responsible for these repairs worked from detailed drawings and descriptions that ensured historical accuracy. This wasn't renovation, it was conservation, maintaining Elizabeth's coffin as both artifact and symbol for future generations. The Virgin Queen's final throne required the same attention to detail that had characterized her living reign. During the 18th century, antiquarian interest in Elizabeth's reign led to renewed examination of her burial arrangements and the coffin that had become synonymous with Tudor royal power. Historians and archaeologists petitioned for permission to study the tomb, creating detailed drawings and measurements that documented every aspect of the coffin's construction and decoration. These studies established Elizabeth's coffin as one of the finest examples of Tudor craftsmanship and royal ceremonial art. The measurements revealed the mathematical precision that had gone into the coffin's construction, with proportions that followed classical architectural principles adapted for mortuary purposes. The length, width, and height ratios created a harmonious design that was both functional and aesthetically pleasing, demonstrating the sophisticated understanding of proportion and design that characterized the best Tudor artisans. Elizabeth's coffin was as much a work of art as a burial container. Detailed examination of the brass fittings revealed the complexity of their manufacture and installation, with each decorative element custom fitted to its specific position on the coffin surface. The metalwork showed evidence of multiple techniques, including casting, engraving, and gilding, creating a variety of textures and finishes that enhanced the visual impact of the overall design. No expense had been spared in creating fittings worthy of the Virgin Queen's final journey. The heraldic decorations were found to be historically accurate down to the smallest details, with every element of Elizabeth's coat of arms rendered according to the strict protocols maintained by the College of Arms. This accuracy wasn't accidental. It reflected the political importance of getting royal symbolism exactly right, especially on artifacts that would be preserved for centuries and examined by future generations of historians and government officials. X-ray examination conducted in the 20th century revealed the internal construction of Elizabeth's coffin, including the methods used to join the oak planks and the placement of metal reinforcements designed to prevent warping or cracking over time. The joinery work showed the highest level of craftsmanship, with dovetail joints cut to tolerances that would be impressive even by modern standards. Elizabeth's coffin builders were master craftsmen working at the peak of their abilities. The internal examination also revealed details about the preservation methods used to protect Elizabeth's remains, including the placement of herbal sachets and the techniques used to create an airtight seal within the coffin. These methods had proven remarkably effective, with the royal remains still largely intact after centuries of burial. The coffin had functioned exactly as intended, protecting its precious contents from the effects of time and environment. Modern conservation techniques were applied to Elizabeth's coffin during the 20th century, including treatment of the wood to prevent further deterioration and restoration of brass elements that had begun to show signs of age. This conservation work was conducted with the same attention to historical accuracy that had characterized previous restoration efforts, ensuring that future generations would be able to study and appreciate this masterpiece of Tudor craftsmanship. The conservation process revealed previously unknown details about the coffin's construction, including maker's marks and construction techniques that provided insights into the identity of the craftsman responsible for its creation. These discoveries added new chapters to Elizabeth's story, connecting her final resting place to specific artisans and workshops that had contributed to the golden age of Tudor decorative arts. Today, Elizabeth's coffin remains in the royal vault beneath Westminster Abbey, no longer visible to the general public, but still serving as a powerful symbol of royal authority and Tudor achievement. The coffin has outlasted the dynasty it represented, surviving political upheavals, architectural renovations, and changing attitudes toward monarchical power. It remains what it was always intended to be, a masterpiece of craftsmanship, and a fitting memorial to one of England's greatest rulers. The influence of Elizabeth's coffin extends beyond its immediate historical significance, inspiring later royal burial arrangements and contributing to the development of English funeral traditions that persist today. Elements of design and ceremony pioneered for Elizabeth's funeral have been adapted and modified for subsequent royal occasions, creating a continuing tradition that links modern monarchy to its Tudor origins. Museum exhibitions have featured detailed replicas of Elizabeth's coffin, allowing contemporary audiences to appreciate the craftsmanship and symbolism that went into its creation. These replicas, based on historical documentation and archaeological evidence, provide insights into Tudor funeral practices and the role of ceremonial objects in maintaining royal authority across generations. Elizabeth's coffin continues to educate and inspire, fulfilling a function its creators never could have anticipated. The story of Elizabeth's coffin is ultimately the story of how a monarchy manages the transition from life to death, from reign to legacy. Every element of the coffin's design and construction was calculated to serve political as well as practical purposes, ensuring that Elizabeth's death would strengthen rather than weaken the institution of monarchy. The coffin succeeded brilliantly in this purpose, creating a spectacle of royal death that enhanced rather than diminished the mystique of royal power. The coffin's influence on popular culture has been equally remarkable, inspiring countless works of fiction, drama, and historical scholarship that continue to examine the relationship between royal power and public spectacle. Writers and historians have used Elizabeth's funeral arrangements as a lens through which to examine broader questions about political authority, religious belief, and the role of ceremony in maintaining social order. The coffin has become a symbol that transcends its original function, representing the complex intersection of personal mortality and public responsibility that defines monarchical rule. Archaeological studies of the royal vault have provided ongoing insights into Tudor burial practices and the materials science behind the coffin's remarkable preservation. Researchers have analyzed wood samples, metal compositions, and textile fragments to understand the techniques used by 16th century craftsmen and the environmental conditions that have allowed Elizabeth's coffin to survive largely intact for over 4 centuries. These scientific investigations have revealed the sophistication of Tudor preservation methods and the careful planning that went into creating burial arrangements designed to last for eternity. The economic impact of Elizabeth's funeral arrangements, including the cost of her elaborate coffin, has been calculated by economic historians studying the fiscal policies of early modern monarchies. The expense was enormous by contemporary standards, representing a significant portion of the royal treasury's annual expenditure, but the political benefits of the spectacular funeral more than justified the cost. The coffin and its associated ceremonies demonstrated English wealth and stability to foreign observers, while providing domestic audiences with a memorable spectacle that reinforced their emotional connection to the monarchy. Educational programs at Westminster Abbey continue to use Elizabeth's burial site as a teaching tool, helping students understand the historical development of royal funeral traditions and the symbolic significance of monarchical death rituals. School groups regularly visit the Abbey to learn about Tudor history, with Elizabeth's coffin serving as a tangible connection to one of England's most important historical periods. The coffin has become an educational artifact, helping new generations understand the complexities of royal power and the ways in which political authority is maintained through ceremony and symbolism. International scholarly conferences have been organized around the study of Elizabeth's funeral arrangements and their influence on European royal burial practices. historians from around the world gather to examine the political, religious, and artistic significance of the Virgin Queen's final ceremonies, with her coffin serving as a central focus for discussions about the role of material culture in maintaining political authority. These academic gatherings have produced substantial scholarship that continues to deepen our understanding of early modern monarchy and its survival strategies. The restoration techniques developed for maintaining Elizabeth's coffin have been applied to other historical artifacts, contributing to advances in conservation science and museum preservation practices. The methods used to protect the oak wood and brass fittings have influenced conservation protocols for similar artifacts in collections around the world, ensuring that future generations will be able to study and appreciate these remarkable examples of historical craftsmanship. Elizabeth's coffin has become a case study in successful long-term preservation. Literary analysis of contemporary accounts of Elizabeth's funeral has revealed the sophisticated propaganda strategies employed by Tudor government officials to shape public perception of the event. The coffin and its elaborate presentation were described in official publications, designed to create lasting memories of royal magnificence and political stability. These textual accounts worked in conjunction with the visual spectacle of the funeral to create a multimedia experience that reinforced monarchical authority across multiple social levels and communication channels. The symbolic significance of Elizabeth's coffin has evolved over time, acquiring new meanings as historical perspectives have shifted and new political contexts have emerged. During periods of political uncertainty, historians and political commentators have invoked the stability and continuity represented by Elizabeth's funeral arrangements as models for contemporary leadership challenges. The coffin has become a touchstone for discussions about effective governance and the importance of maintaining public confidence in political institutions. Technological advances have allowed for increasingly sophisticated analysis of Elizabeth's coffin and burial site, including ground-penetrating radar surveys that have mapped the underground structure of the royal vault without disturbing the actual burial chamber. These non-invasive investigation techniques have provided detailed information about the coffin's current condition and the environmental factors affecting its long-term preservation. The data collected through these studies informs ongoing conservation efforts and helps predict future preservation needs. The craftsmanship techniques used in creating Elizabeth's coffin have been studied by contemporary artisans seeking to understand and recreate the skills of Tudor-era woodworkers and metalworkers. Master craftsmen have attempted to replicate the joinery methods, brass working techniques, and decorative approaches used in the coffin's construction, gaining insights into the training systems and workshop practices that produced such remarkable results. These efforts have contributed to the revival of traditional craft techniques and the preservation of historical manufacturing knowledge. Psychological studies of royal funeral attendants have examined the emotional impact of viewing Elizabeth's coffin and participating in the associated ceremonies, providing insights into the ways in which political spectacle influences public behavior and attitude formation. Researchers have analyzed contemporary accounts of mourner reactions to understand how the coffin's visual design and ceremonial presentation affected viewers' perceptions of royal authority and their own relationship to political power. These studies illuminate the sophisticated understanding of mass psychology that informed Tudor funeral planning. The environmental history of Westminster Abbey has been reconstructed through analysis of the conditions surrounding Elizabeth's coffin, providing information about historical climate patterns, air quality, and structural changes that have affected the preservation of royal burials over time. This environmental data helps explain why Elizabeth's coffin has survived in such good condition compared to other historical artifacts, and informs current conservation strategies designed to protect the burial site from future environmental challenges. Comparative studies of royal coffins from different historical periods and cultural contexts have used Elizabeth's burial arrangements as a benchmark for evaluating the relative sophistication and symbolic effectiveness of monarchical death rituals across Europe and beyond. These cross-cultural analyses have revealed common patterns in the ways different societies have used funeral spectacle to maintain political authority and manage transitions of power. Elizabeth's coffin has become a standard against which other royal burial practices are measured. The theological implications of Elizabeth's funeral arrangements, including the religious symbolism embedded in her coffin's design and decoration, have been examined by scholars studying the relationship between political authority and religious belief in early modern England. The coffin's placement within the sacred space of Westminster Abbey and its integration with Anglican funeral rites reflected the complex religious politics of Elizabeth's reign and the ongoing Protestant Reformation. These religious dimensions added layers of meaning to the coffin's political symbolism. Gender studies scholars have analysed Elizabeth's coffin and funeral arrangements as expressions of female royal authority in a predominantly patriarchal political system, examining how the Virgin Queen's death rituals both reinforced and challenged conventional expectations about women's roles in public life. The coffin's design incorporated traditional symbols of royal authority while acknowledging Elizabeth's unique status as an unmarried female ruler, creating a complex statement about gender and power that continues to inform scholarly discussions about women in leadership positions. The influence of Elizabeth's coffin on subsequent royal funeral planning can be traced through detailed examination of burial arrangements for later English monarchs, revealing patterns of continuity and innovation that reflect changing political circumstances and evolving artistic tastes. Elements of design and ceremony pioneered for Elizabeth's funeral have been adapted, modified, and sometimes abandoned by later royal funeral planners, creating a documented history of how monarchical death rituals respond to changing times while maintaining core symbolic functions. Digital reconstruction projects have created detailed, three-dimensional models of Elizabeth's coffin based on historical documentation and archaeological evidence, allowing virtual visitors to examine the artifact from angles and perspectives that would be impossible in the actual burial chamber. These digital models serve educational and research purposes, while protecting the physical coffin from the potential damage associated with increased access and handling. The virtual Elizabeth coffin has become a valuable resource for scholars and students worldwide. The economic ripple effects of Elizabeth's elaborate funeral arrangements extended far beyond the immediate costs of coffin construction and ceremonial presentation, stimulating demand for luxury goods and specialized services that supported entire industries and craft communities throughout England. The funeral created employment for hundreds of artisans, suppliers, and service providers while demonstrating the economic power of monarchical consumption patterns. Elizabeth's coffin was both a work of art and a significant economic stimulus that benefited multiple sectors of the Tudor economy. Contemporary accounts of foreign visitors' reactions to Elizabeth's coffin provide insights into international perceptions of English royal authority and the effectiveness of funeral spectacle as a form of diplomatic communication. Foreign ambassadors and dignitaries wrote detailed reports describing the coffin's craftsmanship and symbolic significance, transmitting information about English political stability and cultural achievement back to their home governments. The coffin served as an instrument of international relations, conveying messages about English power and prestige to audiences across Europe. The preservation challenges associated with maintaining Elizabeth's coffin in its underground environment have led to innovations in conservation technology and environmental monitoring that have applications far beyond the specific requirements of royal burial sites. Climate control systems, humidity monitoring equipment, and protective barriers developed for the royal vault have been adapted for use in museums, libraries, and archives around the world, contributing to broader advances in cultural heritage preservation. Genealogical research has traced the family connections and professional networks of the craftsmen responsible for creating Elizabeth's coffin, revealing the social and economic structures that supported high-level artistic production in Tudor England. These investigations have identified specific workshops, training relationships, and craft guilds that contributed to the coffin's creation, providing insights into the organization of skilled labor and the transmission of technical knowledge in early modern society. The acoustic properties of Elizabeth's coffin and its burial environment have been studied by researchers interested in how standing, how sound and ceremony interacted during the funeral proceedings and subsequent commemorative events. The oak construction and brass fittings would have affected the way voices, music, and other sounds were transmitted and perceived in the confined space of Westminster Abbey, influencing the emotional impact of the funeral service and the effectiveness of ritual communication. Philosophical discussions about the nature of monarchy and political authority have frequently referenced Elizabeth's coffin as a material embodiment of abstract concepts about power, continuity, and social order. Political theorists have examined the ways in which physical artifacts like the coffin mediate between individual mortality and institutional permanence, exploring how material culture supports the conceptual frameworks that justify and maintain hierarchical political systems. Elizabeth's coffin has become a case study in the relationship between objects and ideas. The influence of Elizabeth's funeral arrangements on Protestant funeral practices more generally has been traced through examination of contemporary religious writings and ceremonial innovations that adapted royal protocols for use by non-royal families and religious communities. Elements of design, ceremony, and symbolism pioneered for Elizabeth's funeral were modified and adopted by Protestant churches seeking to create dignified alternatives to Catholic funeral traditions. The coffin's design principles influenced funeral practices far beyond the royal family. Metallurgical analysis of the brass fittings from Elizabeth's coffin has provided information about 16th century metalworking techniques and the sources of raw materials used in high-status decorative projects. Researchers have identified the specific alloy compositions, manufacturing methods, and finishing techniques employed by Tudor metalworkers, contributing to broader understanding of early modern industrial practices and trade networks. The brass fittings have become valuable sources of information about historical technology and commerce. The psychological impact of viewing Elizabeth's coffin on contemporary mourners has been reconstructed through analysis of personal letters, diary entries, and other private documents that recorded individual reactions to the funeral spectacle. These personal accounts reveal the emotional responses that the coffin's impressive appearance was designed to evoke, providing insights into the effectiveness of royal funeral planning and the ways in which political spectacle influenced personal grief and loyalty. The coffin succeeded in its intended psychological effects. Regional variations in how Elizabeth's funeral was commemorated throughout England have been documented through examination of local records, revealing how news of the Queen's death and descriptions of her elaborate coffin were received and interpreted in different communities. Provincial responses to the royal funeral provide insights into the geographic reach of monarchical authority and the ways in which royal symbolism was adapted to local circumstances and cultural preferences. The role of Elizabeth's coffin in establishing precedents for royal funeral protocol has been analysed through comparison with earlier English royal burials and examination of the innovations introduced specifically for the Virgin Queen's funeral. The elaborate coffin and associated ceremonies represented both continuity with established tradition and significant innovations that reflected Elizabeth's unique position as the last Tudor monarch. These innovations became standard elements of royal funeral practice for subsequent centuries. Art historical analysis has placed Elizabeth's coffin within the broader context of Tudor decorative arts, examining how its design elements reflected contemporary aesthetic preferences and artistic influences from continental European sources. The coffin's combination of English craftsmanship with international design motifs demonstrates the cosmopolitan character of Tudor court culture and the ways in which political authority was expressed through artistic sophistication and cultural achievement. The storage and cataloguing systems developed for maintaining records related to Elizabeth's coffin and funeral arrangements have influenced archival practices and historical documentation methods throughout the English-speaking world. The detailed record keeping associated with royal funerals established precedents for institutional memory and historical preservation that continue to inform contemporary approaches to maintaining cultural heritage and governmental continuity. In the end, Elizabeth's coffin became exactly what it was designed to be, not just a container for royal remains, but a symbol of continuity, craftsmanship, and the enduring power of careful stagecraft. the Virgin Queen's final performance was her most successful, creating a legacy that has lasted for centuries and continues to influence how we understand the relationship between power, death, and public memory. Her coffin was the perfect final prop for a ruler who understood better than any of her contemporaries that monarchy is ultimately a performance, and the best performances are the ones that people remember long after the curtain falls. The oak and brass masterpiece that carried Elizabeth from mortality to legend represents the ultimate achievement of Tudor political theatre, a work of art that continues to command respect and attention more than 4 centuries after it was sealed and placed in the darkness of the royal vault, where it remains today as testament to the enduring power of exceptional craftsmanship in service of exceptional monarchy.